I once had the great realization that even logic, with its very simple fundamental basis of if then, if this then that, which is the foundational principle of logic, is a story. If this then that is this little mini story. Uh, and there's a poem by Muriel Rukeyser where she says, the universe is made of stories, not atoms. Everything has a story. Every situation has a story. The future is a story. The past is a story. We make sense. Things have to fit in some kind of narrative for it to make sense to us. And we invite each other into our universes by telling our stories. This is what happened to me. This is how it makes sense to me. This is what the cause and effects are that I see. All arguments are kind of stories. So we make sense and we share sense largely through narratives. And if I am talking to you about my narrative, my story, the way things make sense to me, and you are telling me about your sense, your narrative, there's a sense in which we are weaving some kind of, either we're weaving narratives that are more like our original ones that exclude the other one, but now we know that we're excluding you, so we've woven, I know I'm excluding you because I've woven a story that has you outside of my sense making, or we can weave some kind of story that weaves us together. We can say either we've woven a new story that's different from the one we started with, or we're weaving a story that includes both of our stories, kind of, and transcends the stories that we had at the beginning. Or we can weave a story that goes, oh, here's a larger picture within which I'm looking at it this way and you're looking at it that way, and there's probably other people looking at it other ways, but you have a multiple viewpoint story that doesn't have to integrate it all into one thing that makes the differences not be there. It can also be one thing where the differences are very present. It's like, what are the gifts and limitations of the liberal viewpoint? What are the gifts and limitations of the conservative viewpoint? These can be woven together in interesting ways. Science and spirituality, there's all sorts of male and female, all sorts of ways to weave things together in interesting, interesting ways. So obvious that happens with sharing personal stories all the time. And group stories, it's like different types of people. Like, what is the experience of white men and black women? How to hear those stories. And if you really get what somebody's story is, there's an empathic feeling that goes along with the empathic understanding. And social capital, in terms of, to the extent we connect with each other, whether it's within our group or between our groups, the more we can hear each other and share our stories, be open about our stories, the more connection and relationship there is to use for other things. That's the idea of social capital, which is another one of the patterns in the system. And awareness, of course, we go, oh, very often I'll be in an argument with somebody else, be upset with each other, and I'll suddenly get a sense, I'll say, so wait a minute, I think you're thinking that I was meaning blah, 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 that you're telling yourself that story, and that's not what's going on for me. Or they'll say it, I'll realize it suddenly, oh, I thought you meant blah, 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 but actually means blah, blah, blah. There's an expanded awareness of what's going on in the situation. And of course, collective intelligence, because the more we hear each other's narratives, the more we can see through each other's eyes, the more we can together create something that actually works. And in some systems, there will be people who have gone through a deliberative process or discussed an issue together on behalf of a larger community, a small group of people, a few dozen people or 100 people or whatever, get together for a few days or a few weeks or whatever, and to explore an issue and come up with some statement about it or some dream. Here's some shared aspiration, whatever. And they do that on behalf of a larger community, and then they come out of that and share the story of what happened with them, you know, how they came in from different places kind of, and then as they talked, they discovered things, realized things that wove them together more and more, and they came up with something. And rather than just, here's our report, they said, here's the journey we went through, and invite other people to see what that was and how they came to their final conclusions. And it includes helping people shift, people who haven't been part of that process. If they hear the story well and they see that people like them who were involved shifted in certain ways or made certain discoveries or decided to work together on things, they go, oh, maybe I could do that too. Or the shift happens intrinsically. They go, I didn't realize that. So now I realize it. Now I'm a different person, having heard this story of what happened to these people who are like me, dealing with other people who are not like me, just like I have to deal with them in my life. But the people in this deliberation did so much better in dealing with people who are different than I do in my life. And I can now do that. I can now deal better with those people, things like that. So this idea of sharing stories from the interpersonal stuff all the way up to the whole community and society stuff is a very, very powerful piece of the Wise Democracy vision and journey. And then back to the methods. Participatory narrative inquiry, storycoloredglasses.com describes it, which is, you know, gathering stories from a community and finding patterns in them. Maclean's, and Maclean's magazine, of course, is a premier, you know, story sharing and storytelling thing. And the Civic Council's Vorarlberg's kind of approach with the report out and the community cafe, and then the that other one with the stakeholders and officials that follows up. That's a whole another very dense way of sharing stories. Multiple viewpoint drama, Anna Deavere Smith's work, where she did a couple of, I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, I write about it here and there. She did video performances of riots, 2 different riots. One was the Rodney King riot, and, that was in when the guys who beat up Rodney King, the cops that beat up Rodney King, got off, were found not guilty by a all-white jury. The LA just blew up. You know, riots burning, people being killed, and it was a total mess. And she went and interviewed people who were played different roles in the riots, and then she does a one-woman show performance where she has, you know, 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes for each person. She becomes that person. She's a light-colored black woman, and be all sorts of different races depending on how she's, you know, made up and dressed and talks. So she's all these different people, and you get a multi-dimensional view of the riot, which doesn't give you any answers, but it sure changes your awareness and empathy. And then playback theater, which takes somebody's story and acts it out, often in ways that help them resolve whatever situation they're in. We had playback theater do some mirroring to NCDD. They acted out dynamics they saw going on in the NCDD conference, which is very interesting. There's a being a mirror is part of story sharing. So that